He's going to take the lead with everything. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Can you hear me? Is this a little bit better? Here, maybe I'll just hold it. Yeah. Can everyone hear me? So I'm going to do a talk, and then we'll have time for a bit of a group activity, which I'm really excited about. But first, I'm hoping that we can do something together. If you can hear me, please raise your hand if anyone has ever made you feel like you don't belong. Raise your hand and keep it held. Now have a look around. Today is a day where at your library, in your state, you belong. And so with that in mind, please come sit in the front, come close. Let's be a community. And I'm proud to take the opportunity to share with you my book, The American Muslim Teenager's Handbook. And I'll tell you why it exists, how it came to be, what happened next, and then at the end, we'll do some dreaming together. My name is Imran Hafiz. I co-wrote The American Muslim Teenager's Handbook with my sister, Yasmin Hafiz, who's on the back here, and my mother, Dilara Hafiz. Sadly, my mother can't join us today as my grandmother has just passed. So my mother is with her family now. Please keep us in your prayers if you're so inclined. Before I begin, I want to offer a brief thank you to Saad, to the organizers of Muslim Heritage Month, to Sarah Bawani and Tanya and the other authors who are joining today, for the goat in the coat, for creating this space for conversations like this, and to everyone here for being a part of it. On September 10th, 2001, I went to bed an American. On September 11th, 2001, I woke up a Muslim. I was 10 years old, and my entire world changed. Overnight, voices on the television, on the radio, people with no understanding of what Islam is and no experience of who Muslims actually are, began confidently explaining Islam to the country. They said Muslims were violent, deceptive, dominating, cruel people who hated our freedom, instead of the beautiful, ordinary, flawed people I had always known. Those voices were much louder than the Muslim voices. One of the first things my family did after the horrific attacks was to remove the Arabic license plate that was on the front of our car. In Arizona then, it was legal to only have the back license plate. But we removed it because we were afraid of how non-Muslim Americans might treat us. Many Muslims hid in fear and in shame. People changed their names. They put American flags everywhere as if to quietly say, I'm not one of them. My childhood changed quickly. Kids who had once been friendly and sweet became suspicious. They told me I couldn't play soccer with them anymore. Not because I wasn't very good at soccer, which hadn't really been an issue up until that point, but because they told me, Imran, you're in the Taliban. I was not in the Taliban. I was 10. Around the same time, my sister would go to the bookstore and head straight to the young adult section. She noticed something strange. There were books there for Christian teens, for Wiccan teens, for Mormon teens, for Jewish teens, but not a single book for American Muslim teenagers. My mother, who had been a magazine writer, understood immediately that this wasn't just a momentary problem. She knew that this perceptual gap would follow her children and millions of kids like them throughout their lives. She knew we needed to speak up, and she knew how scary and risky that felt. My father's strength, humility, and deep commitment to Muslim values gave our family the grounding and safety to believe we might be able to do something about it. One day I said to my mom, "Mama, how can we blame people for misunderstanding us if we don't speak up to explain who we are?" That was the day we decided to write a book. Once we knew we were writing a book, the next question was how. It all started at the dinner table. We were already having long conversations as a family about what it meant to be Muslim at that moment in history, what it meant to live as Muslims, how the media talked about us, and how different that was from our actual experience. These conversations may sound familiar to you. We expect a lot of families were and still are having versions of these same conversations. For us, those discussions became a spark. Over time, they turned into outlines, and those outlines became chapters. Libraries mattered to us long before this book ever existed. Going to the library with my family was a huge treat. My sister and I loved reading, and my grandfather used to always tell me, "Beta, knowledge is the one thing no one can ever take from you." As teenagers, we didn't just read in libraries, we worked in them. We helped staff the teen section, selecting books and music, thinking carefully about what belonged on those shelves and what would actually serve young people. Something I'm very happy to see is ongoing at this library. And the teen section and the kids section is really something special we should all be very proud of. And that experience shaped how we thought about this book. We understood it not just as a story, but as something that needed to live somewhere, alongside other books that help teenagers make sense of who they are. From there, we wanted to make sure we weren't telling just our own story. So we sent out surveys and questionnaires to Muslim schools and Muslim teenagers around the country, asking them about their experiences. How did they understand Islam? How were they treated? What questions did they have? Where did they feel misunderstood? You'll see those voices woven through our book. Only after that did we sit down and begin to write. Now, for reference, some of you may remember these days, this was the early 2000s. We didn't have laptops or collaborative Google Docs. We had one family desktop computer, and it lived in the family room. That mattered. Our writing didn't happen in isolation. It happened in a shared space between homework, dinner, and daily life, between watching movies and singing songs. We argued about wording. We debated about what to include and what to leave out. And we took quite seriously the responsibility of speaking to young people, from young people, rather than about them. We were very intentional about who this book was for. It wasn't written for scholars or clergy, and it wasn't written to reassure outsiders. It was written directly to Muslim teenagers, assuming they were intelligent, capable, creative, and curious, that they were capable of holding complexity. These constraints forced clarity. We couldn't hide behind polish or authority. At times, my sister and I had to prevent my mom from including words like groovy. We had to be clear, honest, and precise. And once our book existed, we realized it was very important to be clear about what it is and what it isn't. This is not a theology textbook. It's not meant to settle doctrinal debates or replace religious education. It's not a crisis manual, and it's not a public relations document. We were not trying to convert anyone. We weren't trying to persuade or defend. We simply wanted to explain, in plain English, what Islam is and what it means to live as a Muslim. What the book is something written directly to Muslim teenagers, and importantly, written by Muslim teenagers as well. We assumed our audience was already navigating complex questions about faith, identity, culture, and belonging, often without a language that reflected their lived experience. Our book talks about the very real things teens were dealing with: friendships, family expectations, school, media stereotypes, and the everyday negotiations of living visibly Muslim in America. In particular, a lot of people flipped straight to the chapter called the 4 Ds: dating, dancing, drinking, and drugs. Because it spoke in plain human language, the book also ended up being one of the few accessible sources for non-Muslims who wanted to understand Islam. Their alternatives at that time were dense encyclopedia entries, academic textbooks, doctrinal handbooks, or as I mentioned, the voices on the TV and the radio, none of which actually captured what it feels like to be a Muslim. As a result, the book has been used not only by Muslim teens, but by educators, librarians, parents, professors, and non-Muslims looking for a human entry point. At its core, the book is about giving young Muslims permission to see themselves as whole people, not contradictions. I'll read you now just the chapters in order so you can get a sense of what I mean. The book begins with forewords from Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf, Professor Akbar Ahmed, Asma Gul Hassan, and Raza Aslan. We explained why we wrote this book, how to use this book, that we're very okay with you just flipping through it and finding things that make sense to you. A note to the reader: Islam 101, an overview of the beginning. Shahada, Islam's central belief. Prayer 101, all your prayers answered, with some helpful diagrams. Zakat, charity, what does it really mean? Relax, it's Ramadan, tips for a successful fast. Hajj, the ultimate road trip. The Quran, Islam's holy book. Prophet Muhammad, a short version of a long story. Halal and haram, can I go to McDonald's? The 4 Ds, dating, dancing, drinking, and drugs. Misunderstanding and misconceptions, are all Muslims terrorists? The hijab issue, and you'll have to forgive me for this one. Unveil the controversy. Cultural confusion, examples of Muslim culture. Inventions from the Muslim world. Where did algebra come from anyway? Peer pressure. Don't worry, I feel it too. Islamic interfaith. Why can't we be friends? And in the newest edition, an addendum, Post 9/11 Survival Guide. How do savvy American Muslim teens avoid extremism, fanaticism, radicalism, and other pesky isms? After the book was written, the next question was whether it would be published. At first, the answer was no. As you heard from Tanya, that process can often be quite a difficult one. We couldn't find any support in the traditional publishing world. The book didn't fit neatly into existing categories, and that made it feel risky. We also couldn't find much support within the Islamic publishing world, where there was more comfort with devotional or doctrinal work than with a book that spoke so directly to teenagers about lived experience. But we didn't stop there. We proactively courted press. We organized book signings and talks in libraries, just like this one. In bookstores, in church halls, in synagogues. We spoke at schools, including Martin Luther King Jr. Day events. We showed up wherever people were willing to listen. And resistance showed up too. It came from multiple directions. Some Muslims would approach us at events to tell us what we had written was incorrect, according to them. But they weren't writing their own books. Others felt the book was wrong because it included women who didn't wear hijab. Our book was eventually banned in Saudi Arabia. There was also overt hostility from xenophobic Islamophobes. Some came specifically to harass us at readings, and I'm happy to see they've been quiet today if they're here. And sometimes the resistance was very personal. When I was still in school, another student became angry about the attention the book was receiving. He held a knife to my throat and told me that I hadn't written a teenager's handbook, but rather a terrorist's handbook. I was able to escape, and that student was expelled. But the experience stayed with me. I share this not to shock you, but to be honest about the cost. This work was painful at times, and it carried real risk, and it still felt worth it. Because the overwhelming response from readers, from educators, from librarians, from families, and most importantly, from American Muslim teenagers themselves, was positive. I'll conclude by sharing briefly what came next for me. Before I ever set foot on campus, Duke University was already teaching this book in class. When I later applied, I mentioned that while I had never been there, my words had been. I think that's part of why they let me in. Being in classrooms, talking with students about identity, power, media, and representation deepened my understanding of what this work actually does. It clarified for me that storytelling isn't cultural, or rather it isn't just cultural, it's structural. It shapes what institutions see as possible, legible, and worth supporting. That understanding led me to working at Vice Media. There, I worked on the Emmy Award-winning Vice on HBO series, including the reporting that sent Dennis Rodman to North Korea. And later, I worked as a television producer for Vice Land. That experience taught me how narratives move at scale and what it takes to make complex stories legible to a mass audience. From there, I went to Virtue, Vice's ad agency, where I worked as a researcher, creative, strategist, and insights publisher. Across those roles, my focus was the same: telling stories with depth and humanity, and trying to leave the world slightly better than I found it. Eventually, that work led to a company I now run from right here in Austin, called The Auxiliary, a creative services agency. And at The Auxiliary, Muslim values are not an add-on. They're baked into everything we produce. We work across insights, strategy, creative services, branded content, movement building. And we use the Islamic principle of sadaqah jariyah. Are y'all familiar with this one? The idea of continued repair and ongoing goodness as a design constraint. We kept going. With every project we take on, we try to ensure not only a benefit for clients, but a benefit for society at whole. I'm sharing this not to map a career path, but to say that this book didn't just circulate outward. It shaped the direction of my life. And that's why being here in a library during Muslim Heritage Month matters to me. Libraries are where stories stop being temporary and start becoming part of the public record. Our book began as a family conversation. It now lives on shelves around the world, and it exists because we decided to not stay silent. I want to end by widening the frame. This story is not about a book, but it's not only about a book. Every one of us lives inside at least one story the world gets wrong, about who we are, about what we believe, what we care about, or what we're capable of. Sometimes that story is hostile. Sometimes, most of the time, it's just lazy or illogical. But either way, it has consequences. What this experience taught me is that those stories don't correct themselves. Institutions don't change the world. Platforms don't change the world. Technologies don't change the world. People do. People notice where something is broken or misunderstood. People decide it matters enough to respond. People use whatever tools they already have: conversation, writing, art, classrooms, libraries, to tell a truer story. Our book didn't come from having power or permission. It came from noticing a gap and deciding not to stay silent. So my encouragement to all of you is very simple. Find the place where the world sees you or someone you care about wrong. Ask yourself why that misunderstanding persists, and think about what small, concrete action you could take to change that. Because our world only ever changes when people decide to change it. Before we close, I want to say thank you to everyone, to the Austin Public Library, to the City of Austin, in particular to Saad and the organizers, for choosing to spend your time in a place dedicated to learning, memory, and shared understanding. Thank you for listening.